Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstead, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Stephen Goode. Stephen has been riding motorcycles for decades, and he has a real passion for long-distance tours. In recent years, he rode 14,000 miles to the four corners of the U.S., 12,000 miles to visit all of the lower 48 states, and 17,000 miles to visit nearly every national park in America. This past summer, he embarked on a 75-day, 15,000-mile ride around the country to visit the best Jewish deli in nearly every state. His journey became known as the Great American Deli Schlep, and he raised nearly $20,000 for Maison, a Jewish nonprofit that fights hunger. This is a great episode you don't want to miss, so stay tuned. Hello, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Doing great. And you're in the Chicago area, is that correct?
I am in the Deerfield suburb of Chicago.
Right on. Well, I'm out in California. We have the benefit of internet to keep us in touch. So hopefully the internet connection stays good. Now, you have written a couple of features for Rider Magazine. The most recent is called the Great American Deli Schlep, and we want to get into the details about that. That's in the December issue of Rider. It's really it's a great way to finish up 2021. It's one of the really great features that we published this year. So tell us about how you got into motorcycling. I mean, you've done some of these round the country tours, where you've gone all around the country for thousands and thousands of miles. But how did you get into motorcycling?
Well, when I was about 14, 15 years old, my older brother had a small Honda motorcycle, and I rode it. And my buddies all had little mini bikes, so we rode those around the football field. And when I turned 16, I bought my first bike after working at a gas station for a couple of years and saving up my money, and bought my first motorcycle. And that was a Honda 100 CL. And from there, it just kept growing. I took a little bit of a breather during college, and when I graduated college, after college, bought my second motorcycle, and then moved on from there.
So you stuck with it when you had a family and career and all that stuff? I know sometimes motorcycling takes a back seat to that.
Yes, I did. I was very fortunate. My wife joined me riding pillion, and we took a couple of trips. And then once our two sons were born in 1985 and 1988, I was still able to take some trips. We actually took my oldest son, and gave him to his aunt, for 2 weeks, and we went out to Colorado and rode all through Colorado when he was about 8 months old. So so we kept it going.
Great. Now, you've gone on several trips. We in the July issue of Rider, we had a feature that you had written about a tour that you did where you visited nearly every national park in the United States. And I think before that, you also did a trip where you went to the four corners of the U.S. So what got you into doing these really long distance, many days, weeks in a row type trips?
Well, in 2012, I sort of semi-retired from the real estate business, and decided that I was looking at the Iron Butt website, and they had the four corners of the United States listed, where you're supposed to do it in something like 10 days. I decided I liked the trip, but I didn't want to do it in 10 days. I wanted to sightsee and visit friends and relatives along the way. So that was in 2013. I did four corners of the United States. Came back, loved it so much that the following year I decided I wanted to do all 48 states, the lower 48, which I did, which was surprisingly less mileage than the four corners, because all you had to do is go in and actually, quote, touch the state and move on. That was a little bit over 11,000 miles. And then in 2017, a friend of mine, my wife, actually this one, my wife sent me a email with a map of the United States, detailing every national park in the lower 48 states and the fastest way to get there. There was a professor who who had some algorithm and plotted it on a U.S. map. So in 2017, I decided to visit 47 national parks in the lower 48 states.
Wow.
Now I think there's 49. They added 2 in the last year or 2.
Well, I know a couple of those are on islands. There's the Dry Tortugas and the Channel Islands, which is just off the coast of where I live. Were you able to visit those? Did you take a ferry or something out and visit those?
I did. There's actually 3 national parks that is only accessible via a boat, and Dry Tortugas, 70 miles west of Key West, Florida. It's about a 2.5-hour boat ride, and so I went to that. That's a coordination issue because they only sell, I think, 150 or 175 tickets per day. Okay. So I had to make sure I was in Key West the morning of the time that we were supposed to leave. So it's a 1-day trip out there, visit the island, and then come back. And then the other islands, same thing. You had to make sure that you had the tickets in hand because there were a limited supply.
Sure.
And I don't do well on boats, so that was the toughest part of the trip. I was just shy of over the side of the boat.
It's a little green, yeah. I understand.
Little green.
Yeah, especially going out to the Channel Islands, it can get a little choppy out there for sure. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was great.
So these trips, did you do all these solo?
Yes. I prefer riding solo. What I did is I connected with other motorcyclists around the country that I was friendly with, and rode with them for like 2 or 3 days. On this last trip, the Deli Schlep trip, I'm a member of the Jewish Motorcycle Alliance, which is a international organization of Jewish bikers, and we have clubs in 30 different cities in the United States, Canada, Australia, Israel, England, and what I did is I put the word out to them and said, I'm going to be in Cleveland, I'm going to be in Atlanta or LA, whatever, and I'm going to be riding on this Deli Schlep, and I would hook up with them for the ride into the deli. Typically, we'd have 5 or 10 motorcyclists riding into the deli. And then on occasion, a couple of them would say, well, I want to join you for 2 or 3 days, at which point, 2 or 3 days on the road. And then we say our goodbyes and then move on.
Awesome.
But probably 95% was solo.
Sure. Well, you mentioned the Deli Schlep, so let's talk about that. So you've talked about the 4 corners, visiting all the lower 48 states, visiting nearly every national park in the United States. So you checked off some of the big bucket list rides for American, long haul motorcyclists. So looking for a new challenge, how did you come up with this most recent trip that you did this past summer?
So my club, the Chicago Jewish Motorcycle Club, called the Highway Riders, there's a member in there who knows of my passion, and he shoots me an email with a article written by Nasher magazine, which is a magazine highlighting Jewish foods around the United States, and it listed an article that the best Jewish deli or top Jewish deli in every state, and this guy Roger Burton sends me this article, and he goes, "This should be your next trip." I looked at it, and I looked at my wife, and she just shook her head and said, "Okay, go for it." she knew the drill. So she said, "Go for it." And so I started plotting it out. I called Nasher magazine, started that process going. And then my wife said, "Look, if you're going to do this trip, why don't you do it as a fundraiser and an awareness project of hunger in the United States? And you should partner with Mazone." Mazone is based in LA. And they're a Jewish organization that fights hunger through public policy change. They have offices in Washington, D.C. and LA. And so they attack hunger through trying to change the laws around hunger for, veterans, seniors, singles, people who are food insecure. And so I learned a lot. One of the things I did learn was that there were 38 million Americans prior to COVID that were food insecure. The definition of food insecurity is at some point during the past 12 months, you don't know where your next meal's coming from.
Okay.
That's called food insecurity. What they told me is that number jumped to 80 million people during COVID.
Wow.
Which is astounding. That's like 1 in 4. So I partnered with Mazzone, and they did a lot of the behind the scenes. I laid out the trip. I organized the coordination and with my clubs, my various clubs, and but they did all the behind the scenes work, the logos, the posters, reaching out to every deli, that type of thing.
So you're based in the Chicago area, so I assume one of these delis on this list would be in Chicago. But then you had to plot out the route to connect the dots to go to all of these delis. Is that correct?
That is right. Right. So what I did is I sat down with a United States map. First I developed the spreadsheet, and then I sat down with the map and I said, okay, what's the most expeditious way to hit all these delis? Because literally I started at Manny's in Chicago, and then I did Indianapolis, and then down to Kentucky, and then up to Ann Arbor, and I just started doing the whole East Coast thing. So I went East Coast first, and then I dropped down to go to Florida, and then started bouncing up and down, all the way out west.
Awesome. So this trip took you how long, and about how many miles did you cover?
The trip started June 1st, and the last deli was August 14th. So that was 75 days. Wow. The total mileage was just under 15,000. I think it was 14,800 miles, something like that. I thought it was going to be about 16,000 miles, but I guess I didn't do as many side trips as I thought.
So you did a little sightseeing along the way. It wasn't just visiting delis.
Right. Yeah. I visited friends and relatives, and I rode Route 36 in California.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is wonderful. Oh my goodness, 140 miles of curves.
Fantastic.
Which you just don't get in Illinois.
No. We're pretty blessed with the number of curvy roads in California. So 2.5 months. You did it during the summer. What motorcycle did you ride?
I had a 2018 Honda Goldwing Tour, which was a great bike for this type of trip. It was all pavement pretty much, and it worked beautifully.
Are you a standard transmission or DCT guy?
Standard.
Gotcha.
Standard transmission. Yeah.
So you've got your Goldwing. You're loaded up. So tell me a little bit about how this works, because I know from reading the feature that you wrote for Ryder it sounded like this was a logistical challenge. I mean, you clearly built in enough time to be able to visit some friends and family and some sites along the way. But you're trying to coordinate by going to some of these delis. I know you had some media interviews and so forth. So how did the logistics of a trip like this work out?
This trip was probably the most difficult trip to plan out. The Four Corners was easy. All I had to do was be at 4 different locations in the entire trip. But on this particular trip, I was meeting up with the deli owners, the media, because they would try to typically have media there. So I had to tell them, I'm going to be at your place on Tuesday, June 12th at 11:30. And all the coordination was focused on that. So I had to roll into within 50, 75 miles of that town, whichever town it was, whichever town they were located in. I had to be within 50 to 75 miles of that town so I could get up in the morning and make sure that I could get to the deli in time and do the media interviews, which meant that a lot of times I had to leave the prior deli the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 1:30, in order to get enough miles in to get to the next deli. So there were 42 delis on the trip out of 75 days. So, I was at a deli every other day.
Wow.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. So, and also, as you mentioned, because the top Jewish deli in most states would typically be in a large city, maybe there's,
Right.
And so a lot of long distance motorcyclists, you go on a tour, most people would avoid cities, but you're having to go into cities at least 42 of them. And so you got to get into a city, you got to get out to a city. Yeah, you can do the occasional Route 36 enjoyable ride, but I'm sure there was a lot of it was just dealing with traffic.
Well, typically what I would do is I would do back roads between cities. When I get within 50 miles of a major city like an Atlanta or New York or whatever, or LA, I would jump on the highways only to avoid the stoplights and the congestion and try to get in and out of the city as quickly as possible. But once I'm out of the city, I was fine. I was on the back roads. I hit my GPS and say back roads, and boom, I was on my way to the next city via back roads. And that's how I planned it actually with my initial spreadsheet. So my initial spreadsheet took into account how long it would take me on back roads to get from, one city to the other. And the one city that really sort of freaked me out a little bit was New York. I mean, riding into Manhattan, not knowing Manhattan, I was a little concerned. What I didn't realize is that as soon as you get within 5 miles of Manhattan, you're going 10 miles an hour. You're stuck in traffic. So you've got plenty of time to adjust. You're not going 60 miles an hour and saying, oh, geez, my exit's over there. You had plenty of time to adjust. And as you well know, it's tough to get into a lot of trouble at 10 miles an hour.
Sure. Yeah. I've ridden in and out of Manhattan before, and it's a quite an experience for sure. Yeah.
Right. So, but all the others, having come from Chicago, I was used to riding in big cities.
Sure.
So it's just the fact that I didn't know all of the intricacies of their highway systems.
Right. So you mentioned you went to Manny's Deli in Chicago. I know in New York you went to Katz's, which is probably the most famous deli that most people have either heard of or seen or something like that. So tell us about some of these other delis, in terms of their, I know some of them got a little bit of a backstory. I know you went to one, you were one of the first customers of one deli, and another deli was over 100 years old.
Right. I went to the first deli, and they were not open. They were just about to open in a week, and they called and they said, "Look, we're not open, but we'll open for you." The other deli, Atman's in Philadelphia, not Philadelphia. I'm sorry, Atman's was in
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Thank you. Jeez. That's the other. Honestly, that's the other component. Is that you don't even remember what you did the day before because you're constantly moving through these delis. So Atman's in Baltimore was 105 years old.
Wow.
So you went from a deli that literally was about to open in a week to Atman's, which was third generation, which is kind of interesting. Some of the other delis, that was interesting was General Muir down in Atlanta, Herschel's in Philadelphia. Really, they all had a story, which was wonderful behind their existence. Which is great.
I imagine it's interesting because many people can go to a deli or a restaurant and order some food, but you had the opportunity to meet owners or managers, and I know many of these delis are they're family-owned businesses, multi-generation family-owned businesses, and so yeah, you got to meet those folks and hear their story, which I'm sure was very fascinating.
Absolutely. One of the more interesting ones was Kenny and Ziggy's. Ziggy Gruber down in Houston. They actually made a video called I think it was called The Deli Man, and he was prominently displayed in that video documentary about how there were thousands of Jewish delis and now there's literally hundreds, nowadays. And so he was a very interesting character, and really I think he's like third generation deli owner, and it was just fun because you learned a lot, and they were very proud of their restaurants, and rightfully so. They're bringing some terrific taste, food to the market that they serve.
Well, do you have a favorite sandwich you would typically order or meal that you would get at a Jewish deli? I know every menu is different, but there are usually some standards.
My personal favorite is a corned beef sandwich with potato pancake.
Ah.
That being said, I didn't order it at every deli. I just couldn't. So I sampled a little bit of everything, and which was fun. I mean, so I sort of explored the total menu of every deli, whether it be pastrami or corned beef or brisket or whatever. I was able to jump in and figure out which one I was feeling what I had a taste for that day.
It's interesting when I look through the photos that you had sent us. As much as I like seeing photos of your motorcycle parked in a scenic location, or you had a banner that you carried with you. You would have it with a group of people from the deli, or maybe some of your friends from the Jewish Motorcyclist Alliance in front. But you had some of the most mouthwatering food photos. I mean, some of these super stacked high sandwiches, the potato latkes, the matzo ball soup. I mean, you just had a little bit of everything. And so we tried to include a variety of those in the story, but man, that made me super jealous to go and sample all that food in so many different places.
But it was terrific. It was funny because all my friends and family said before the trip, they said, "Oh my God, you're gonna gain 40 pounds. Your cholesterol is gonna go sky high. You got to be careful what you're." And actually, a friend of mine who's also a motorcyclist said, he's a doctor, said, "Be careful what you're eating there, Steve." Turned out, which was fascinating. I weighed myself and I did all of the statistics, the medical statistics beforehand. Took all my blood work and everything else beforehand, and then afterwards, I actually lost 2 or 3 pounds on this trip.
Huh?
And people were like, "How did that happen? how did you possibly go to all these delis and lose weight?" And I said, "Look, when you're on a motorcycle, you don't have a refrigerator that you can go to every 5 minutes.
Sure.
And when you're in the hotel room, it's whatever you bring into the hotel room." So pretty much I was 3 meals a day and a couple of almonds and snacks during the breaks, and that was it.
Well, you're also riding in the summertime. I know you were dealing with some. I mean, I rode from Denver to back to Southern California in August, and when I was going through down through Mesquite, Nevada, and Las Vegas and so forth, it was 100. It topped out at 113 degrees, and so it's like riding through a frying pan. And so, yeah, you're sweating, for hours.
Oh, absolutely. And I think was it Red Bluff, California? I hit 108 on my temperature gauge, and I pulled in, got a hotel room, and the only thing that concerned me, but I wear a water vest. I soak it in water and I put it on under my gear.
Those were great.
Oh my goodness, the Camelback. I fill up a 3-liter insulated Camelback with ice and water and sip on it constantly every 5 minutes. And then a bandana. And then a trick that I just figured out is I had like a wide mouth plastic container, and I shoved my leather gloves into that container every half hour, pulled them out, and they were totally soaked, and then rode with them. So it cooled my hands and my wrists down. So that helped a tremendous amount. Just having water constantly on your body so that as air passed over it, cooled you down.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, living in Southern California and having the Mojave Desert so close, and is that it's extremely dry. So you've got humidity down in the single digits, and then it's really hot. And then, of course, if you're riding on a back road or a freeway, you can be going 60, 70 miles an hour or more. And so it's just like riding through a blast furnace. It's just getting hit in the face. So yeah, those cooling vests, having the hydration pack with ice water. I mean, those are survival strategies, basically, if you ride through those sorts of temperatures. And so yeah, it's just about keeping yourself hydrated, your body as cool as you can. So yeah, I totally get that.
This was on one of my trips. It was really an awakening for me. Being from Chicago, I was riding. It was 106 degrees or 107, and I typically will ride with a full helmet with my face shield up in order to get fresh air in my helmet, my face. And what I realized is that it was cooler to ride with the face shield down than up.
Sure.
And the way that somebody explained it to me is they said, it's like riding into a hairdryer.
Yeah.
You know, a portable hairdryer. It's like having a hairdryer pointed right at your face. Whereas if your shield is down, it's 98.6 or 100 degrees within your helmet versus 110 or 108.
Right.
So that was and we just don't get that temperature in Chicago or the Midwest typically.
No, and it's, you know, it as you well know, because if you rode Route 36, which starts near Red Bluff in the Central Valley of California and goes over the mountains all the way to the coast. I don't know which direction you went, but it ends in near Fortuna, California, which is where the redwoods are, and it can be 50 degrees in the middle of the summer and foggy. So, I mean, it'll be 100 degrees or more in the Central Valley, and it can be, like I said, half that. You know, it can drop 40 to 50 degrees. You know, and when you cross those mountains. So, yeah.
Yeah, I switched out my gloves.
Exactly. Well, I know one of the, you know, you mentioned that Maison is the organization that you supported. You mentioned that they have offices in Los Angeles, and I know that you had taken a photograph with a group of those folks when you went to Cantor's Deli in Los Angeles, which is, I think, one of the only delis on your list I've been to, and I'm actually going to go there today and have one of their corned beef sandwiches. A colleague of mine the Peterson Automotive Museum is just a few blocks south of Cantor's Deli. And it has there's a gallery within the Peterson that always has a small motorcycle exhibit. Sometimes they have larger ones, but this is one called ADV Overland. So we're going to go see a motorcycle exhibit, and then we're going to go up to Cantor's and have ourselves, you know, big corned beef sandwiches. So.
Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah.
That should be fun.
I know this is along the way with Maison that you had a fundraising campaign. I imagine that campaign is still going. So we'll include a link to the Deli Schlep page on Maison's website in the show notes. So what was it like to go through? I know that you had mentioned the pandemic earlier. I think this trip was originally planned for 2020, but you had to postpone it for a year due to the pandemic. So what was the trip like for this year with, you know, delis and different states and riding through there? Was the pandemic much of an impact on this particular trip other than the postponement?
Well, not really, because what happened was, as you know, as you just mentioned, it was postponed. Then, you know, I was vaccinated, so I felt fairly comfortable about getting out and riding. But as you know, motorcycling is a solo sport, and, you know, 90% of the time I was pretty much by myself, checked into hotels, you know, went out to dinner by myself. So I wasn't interacting with a huge group every day. So at probably, my guess at probably about 30 different delis, I had a bigger group. Probably 10 or 12 of them I was by myself, or maybe with one or two other people. So I was able to control my environment relative to exposure.
Sure.
So from that standpoint, I wasn't so concerned about that. However, you know, if you remember in June, everything was plummeting downward as far as numbers, and it was great. You know, everything was opening up, everything was fine. About mid-July, all of a sudden, if you recall, we started hearing that the numbers were ticking back up, and it was climbing pretty rapidly. So between mid-July and mid-August, I was a little bit more concerned, a little more cautious about just sort of staying out of the forefront of exposure.
Sure. Well, I mean, is one of the great benefits of motorcycling, is it really can be a solitary or small group exercise where you're out in the open air, which is what we all know is where you want to be if you're around other people, but you can travel at your own pace and keep a little bit of separation. So do you have, now that you've completed this trip, you've been back home for a few months, do you have another trip in mind? Are you?
You know, and I get that question a lot. And I've got to tell you, I don't know if I'm going to be doing another long distance trip like this, where it's a 2-month, you know, 10, 12, 15,000 mile trip. I'll probably do some smaller trips and leave some trips with some of my riding buddies, you know, to the Blue Ridge Parkway, maybe out to Utah or Glacier. but I don't think I'm going to be doing the massive cross country because sort of been there, done that.
Sure. Well, yeah, you've done it. I guess this is your fourth major trip where you've kind of done big laps around the country in different ways. And I know that's something that a lot of people dream about, is that it's a matter of having the time and the money and the motivation and all of those things. I know you mentioned that a few years back you or at least semi-retired, and that allows you a little bit more flexibility in your schedule. And so yeah, that you've been able to do that is fantastic. That's great.
It's really a blessing, and I realize how fortunate I am to be able to do these types of trips. And for anybody who's listening, you don't have to start with a major trip like that. I mean, my wife and I used to do 2,000-mile trips, take a couple of weeks, 10 days, and just sort of plan out some trips in the Midwest or maybe out to Colorado or the East Coast. And then that built on it. And you build and you learn what works and what doesn't work and where your comfort range is. And it's not for everybody, but for those who want to do these major trips, if you can, pick a organization that you want to raise some money for or some awareness for, and partner with them, and just go out to your community. This was the most personally rewarding trip I've been on, because it allowed me to meet people around the country, fabulous people around the country. And now I've got people in every major city that I could turn to and call upon. And it was really very rewarding, both, from, raising money and awareness regarding hunger, and also making new friends and visiting family. And it was just wonderful. So I would encourage anybody who's thinking about doing that to plan it.
Well, and yeah, again, I had the good fortune of seeing a lot of the photos that you shared with us, and I loved the photos of you and the groups of people, whether it was the owners or family members or workers from the deli, or some of your friends from the JMA standing out in front of some of these delis. There would be some motorcycles parked there. Everybody's all smiles.
Right.
I mean, you sound like you really had an opportunity you met new people at 42 different delis around the country. And that's great. I mean, I know that you had mentioned in your story that, you, partly because you were in so many different states and you rode through so many different areas, that you met people from all walks of life, young, old, urban, rural, people in all kinds of places. And that really is one of the side benefits of going on a motorcycle trip, even one that's not quite as ambitious as yours, but is just that, in addition to the roads that you ride and the sights that you see, it can really be the people that you meet along the way. It can be in a diner, it can be in a gas station, it can be in a park somewhere. And that's always one of the nice parts of travel.
What's interesting is that what I realize is that when you travel, especially by yourself, you have to get out of your comfort zone, whatever that is, or you're just going to be by yourself. So you're going to have to go out and talk to people and interact with people along the way. Also, what I found out is that when you're motorcycling by yourself, it's much easier for people to come up to you. And the opening question is, where are you going? Where are you from? Most people are comfortable doing that if you're by yourself. If you're in a group of 3 or 4 or 5 motorcyclists, people typically won't approach you. So what I have found is that when I was riding with others, I didn't get to meet the locals as much as when I was by myself.
Right. They don't want to interrupt the group. Yeah, they don't want to. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
they don't want to interrupt the group, or the little kids don't want to walk up to a group of 4 guys that look intimidating and say, what kind of motorcycle? Can I touch it? Can I sit on it?
Right.
That type of thing. So it's twofold. When you're by yourself, you have to get out of your comfort zone, and it allows people to come into your circle, so to speak, and start the conversation. And that's the best part. That was the most fun.
Absolutely.
Is finding those people.
Well, I know that, again, the pandemic has been a challenging thing for a lot of us in a lot of different ways. And I know some people have limited their travel. I know I used to go into an office. I've been working from home for the last couple of years. And it can be one of those challenges where if you kind of get out of the habit of doing certain social activities for a variety of reasons, or even some travel. I know we've got this new variant that's just popped up, and we've got the holidays coming up, and people are wondering if they're going to be able to travel. Is that, with a motorcycle trip, even though we're getting into the winter months when many people in the U.S. can't travel, it can really be something, give you something to look forward to start planning a trip for next spring or next summer, whether it's by yourself or with a few buddies. Is that it sounds like you did a lot, obviously, to plan a very logistically challenging trip. You had a lot of coordination involved, whereas in some of your previous trips, you said that you were just really, when you got there, it would be fine. But just being able to plan and anticipate a trip can also it can be as satisfying as the trip itself in some ways, because you've got months and months to look forward to it. Say, hey, as of May 1st or June 1st, I'm going to go on a trip. So that's what I'm hoping with the features that you've written in Rider, with your national park tour, this Deli Schlep, that it inspires people to, like I said, go out on some of these trips. They don't have to be nearly as ambitious, but if there's a place that you've wanted to go, there's so many fantastic places to visit in this country, whether it's some national park or some landmark. I know you visited the geographic center of the United States in Kansas on this trip. There's some place like that you want to go, hey, plan it and start, put a stake in the ground, say, I'm going to leave on June 1st and plan ahead for it.
Yeah. The other thing that about planning and then looking back, I wrote blogs on every single one of my trips. Just sat down. One of the nice things about traveling by yourself is that you get to the hotel room, and after you've had dinner, you've got 2 hours, 3 hours to sit down with your computer and sort of recap the day, your thoughts, whatever those thoughts are along the way. And looking back on that 5-10 years later, you realize what a benefit it is to be able to look back on those notes and recreate the trip.
Right.
So you've got, like you just said, you've got the beauty of planning it, and then you've got the beauty of looking back 2, 3, 4 years later if you keep good notes, and basically you rewrite the trip in your
Absolutely.
brain or your head.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, we'll include a link to your blog, because it's fascinating. I know your wife Judy helped you edit that together and keep it going on a daily basis. You took photos, you went to the delis, but it's really a day by day chronicle of your trip. So it really allows people to go on the journey with you. I have a friend of mine who just this past summer completed the Trans-America Trail, which goes from North Carolina to Oregon on a almost entirely off-road route. He actually used Facebook in a similar way. He did daily posts where he would have however many photos, and he would have pretty detailed captions of each one. So you could go in and follow along and see some of the challenges he had with weather conditions or certain, high passes in the mountains and so forth. So keeping track of what you're doing is a great way to share it with friends or family, but also, like you said, a few years down the line, you can go back and revisit your trip. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but it's always been the most memorable part of a trip is not the day that it's 75 degrees, sunny, no wind, beautiful, nothing happens. It's always, the tire that you hit on the New Jersey Turnpike that happened on this trip. It's always the torrential rainstorm where you end up, riding through about an 8 or 10 inch puddle. You almost dump the bike. I mean, those are the memories. It's always those that sort of stand out on a trip that you remember. The 75-degree sunny day, it's sort of like, okay, that's wonderful, but that doesn't stand out.
I agree. I mean, there's a saying, I think it was C.S. Lewis, that adventure's not enjoyable when it's happening, or something to that effect. Is that you're absolutely right. Some of the parts of the trip when it's long hours in the saddle, or we were talking about how it can be extremely hot sometimes, almost where you feel like it's maybe even dangerous to continue going, is absolutely those difficult situations. It can be a flat tire. It can be, challenging road or something. Those are the things that are most memorable. I know I can absolutely think back to some of my earliest motorcycle rides, and it was riding through an unexpected rainstorm, or it was being, in an area that was very unfamiliar to me, and feeling like I was losing my way or something. So it wasn't just cruising down the road. You're absolutely right. I agree.
Right. Well, one of the things that everybody else has asked me about is, aren't you nervous traveling by yourself? What happens if something happens? Where are they going to find you? How are they going to find you? And one suggestion is to your listeners is that they do this type of a ride by themselves. It's always good to have a personal tracking device with you, and then somebody monitoring, which is what my wife did. So in the morning, I'd get on the bike, I'd call her up, and I'd say, okay, I'm leaving, and I'll be in Missoula, Montana, and I'll be riding through Montana. There's nothing out there. God forbid you get a flat tire or you have an accident and you're on the side of the road. So I said, track me. So these personal tracking devices that you can buy, she would every hour or two just on her phone click in and make sure that I was still moving.
Right.
And so I felt like I had somebody watching over me. And the other thing that was kind of funny that I had to laugh about is that as I was riding through Montana, and I literally didn't see a car for like an hour. You've been there, I'm sure.
Sure.
And you're going, okay, I don't have a sweep. I don't have anybody behind me watching my back. And what I figured out is that if I find a car that's in front of me, what I'll do is I'll pass them and then stay about a half a mile ahead of them, so that I'm not interfering with their travel, but they've got eyes on me.
Right.
So in essence, they became my sweep.
Sure.
So, if I blew a flat tire and I ran off the road, hopefully they would see it happen and call the authorities. So I developed my own sweep that way.
That's smart. That's smart. Well, that's also great advice. I mean, I know that there's the Spot is one brand of the GPS tracker that basically I've got the Garmin InReach, and I absolutely every single ride I have it clipped to my backpack or whatever I'm doing. So my wife, when she's at home, she can keep track of where I'm at. In part because where I live, even though I'm in coastal California, only an hour south of Los Angeles, I can go 20 miles inland, and I'm in the Los Padres National Forest with no cell phone connection. So even if I had an issue up there, I might not be able to reach someone, and I have the ability to send text messages or via satellite. So I can do that with the particular tracker I have. But I have a good friend of mine, an older gentleman that was on a group ride, was in this area, and he split off from the group towards the end of the ride and went home and never made it home, and had basically gone off the road and was a bit trapped under his motorcycle. And he had no way to contact anyone. He was outside of cell range. I don't know if I'm sure he had his cell phone with him, that almost all of us do, but he had no. These trackers have an SOS function where you can basically, call in the cavalry. So yeah, that's great advice. I mean, for the solo travel, I mean, with cell phones, a tracker, credit cards, I mean, you're usually not going to be too far from help if you need it. You're not truly going to be out on your own. So yeah, that really shouldn't be a barrier for most people to go out and enjoy it. Because I'm like you, I really enjoy the solo travel. I travel with groups at times, travel with my wife at times, but especially if I don't really have a real agenda, is that I can just have uninterrupted time in my helmet to myself. I usually don't even listen to music. So I don't have cell phone text messages. I don't have phone calls. I don't have emails, and I can just really let my mind wander and soak up the scenery. And I think it's really has a lot of psychological benefits, being able to ride like that on your own. So
yeah, it's true meditation.
Yes.
The best way I can describe it is it's true meditation, because like you just said, you're by yourself and you're just sort of focused on the road and the surroundings, it lowers your blood pressure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
I actually the only time I used my Spot tracker for the SOS was in right outside of Los Angeles on that road. I think that you just mentioned, Angel's Crest.
Yeah, sure.
Angel's Crest. I came around a curve and there was a guy that lost it on his motorcycle, slammed into the mountain, and was sitting there bleeding. And there were two other motorcycles there, and I pulled up and I said, "Did you call in for help?" They said, "We don't have any cell phone service." So immediately I went to my Spot, hit the SOS button, and I said, "I'm going to go down the road until I get a signal and call it in." as I'm driving there, a helicopter is overhead and 2 ambulances are running up the opposite direction of where I'm going, up to where that guy was.
Absolutely.
So it obviously worked.
Well, absolutely. I mean, again, Angeles Crest Highway is, I mean, it's no more than, 25, 30 miles from, a major city on, either direction. It's just, but you can just be high enough in the mountains and canyons is that if you're out of cell phone range, you're absolutely right. I think it's a really valuable thing. Can be a valuable thing for a fellow motorcyclist. It's not necessarily you individually that goes down. So yeah, those are great strategies for riding, in the roads that we want to ride, the back roads, the backcountry roads where you're getting away from the traffic and the congestion and so forth. Again, if there's mountains, it's pretty easy to get out of cell coverage. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, Stephen, I really appreciate your time. I've really thoroughly enjoyed the features that you've written for Rider Magazine. I've gotten inspired by them. I wish I had the time to go do a trip like that. We will have links in the show notes for Maison for the where they can make a donation to the Deli Schlep. That's still open. Would encourage folks, to go in, make a donation, especially this time of year. That would be helpful. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, I, Greg, I so thoroughly appreciate your enthusiasm, advice, and backing, and really love your magazine. Been reading it since it came out in the '70s. So
thank you.
It's been terrific, and thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and folks, the Great American Deli Schlep feature article is in the December 2021 issue of Rider. You can go to ridermagazine.com and you can subscribe. And we have a digital edition, we have a print edition, and as I said, we'll have links in the show notes. So, Stephen, again, thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day. And for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.